Hello, my name is Rainer Scheppelmann. I have been conducting energy scenario workshops in European cities for a number of years. The workshops in Germany take place on behalf of the German Institute for Urban Studies and the Federal Ministry of Economy and Climate. The question that often comes up in our workshop is about heat pumps, what payback period they have, and how much CO2 they save. The scenario program I use in the workshops can answer this question very well. The program is called reMAC. The letters stand for Regenerative Energy for Metropolitan Areas and Cities. What is special about reMAC is that for each entry, you not only see the CO2 savings of the measure, but also the necessary investment sum and the payback period. Another special feature of reMAC is the local relevance of the program. At the beginning of the workshop, one enters the local population data and the energy consumption mix of the respective city. In the workshop, the calculations of the program are then based on the local data of the respective city. I will show you how reMAC works with a few examples. First, we have to choose the language. reMAC is available in 5 languages: in Italian, French, Spanish, German, and English. I have called up here the data of Musterstadt. I do not give the real name for data protection reasons. Musterstadt is a medium-sized city with 161,000 inhabitants and 79,000 households. So, on average, 2 people live in one dwelling. The age structure does not differ from the national average. To determine the geographical sunshine duration, I chose Köln, Cologne, because Musterstadt is close by. The energy consumption sectors are distributed differently in Musterstadt than in the national average. There's less energy consumption in the services industry sector, but the share of transportation and domestic is higher. Such differences influence the results of the workshop. One can enter further local data in reMAC. This is done if they differ from the national average. In Musterstadt, there are fewer individual houses. The ratio of services and industry differs also from the national average. In this scenario workshop, the participants first agree on a target horizon. Usually it is the year 2040, because the local climate plans have this target year. In a workshop, possible measures in the various energy consumption sectors are discussed. These are the domestic sector, with electricity, heating, cooling, the services industry sector with electricity and heating, cooling, and the transportation sector with road transport and rail transport. The participants each agree on a measure and a value, which is then entered into the scenario. Let us choose as an example the sector of private households and there the heat pump, which is a much discussed topic. In the area of private households, we find sub-items electricity and heating and cooling. We choose the second area. As we can see, 73% of the heating systems in German households were fossil-fueled in 2020. The task now is to find the right measures to greatly reduce the share of fossil fuels. In Musterstadt, the workshop assumed that 50% of the buildings will have a heat pump in 2040. Perhaps this assumption seems too optimistic to you. However, in the workshop discussion, the city planning representative pointed out that the annual substitution rate in the building sector is just under 2%. So in 2040, about 30% of the buildings will have been built in the next 17 years and will most likely have a heat pump. If we assume that heat pumps will also partly replace fossil heating methods in existing buildings, the figure of 50% is not too high. Let's see what this assumption yields. If we enter the figure 50% heat pumps, we immediately see the effects. CO2 emissions in private households fall by 30%. The fact that they have not also fallen by 50% is due to the fact that heat pumps also consume energy, namely electrical energy. The payback period is 29 years. This seems very long and uneconomical. However, there are two other parameters that influence the results. The reduction in CO2 emissions depends, among other things, on the extent to which the national electricity grid becomes fossil-free in 2040, because heat pumps also consume electricity. The workshop assumed that the goal of having an almost CO2-free electricity grid in 2040 is achievable, and that therefore the assumption of a 90% CO2-free electricity grid is realistic. If we want to enter this value, we have to press another button, decarbonization. Here we can change the slider to 90% renewables in the national grid. Now we see that the CO2 emissions are lower by 63% in the domestic sector. This is not only due to the heat pump, but also to the other electrical consumers in the households, which are now operated CO2-free. Nothing had changed concerning the amortization period. There's another adjusting screw for this. The payback period of an investment is influenced, among other things, by how fossil energy prices develop in the future. reMAC works with the figures of the year 2020. The values of 2021 and 2022 are not yet available and would also not be representative due to the influence of the corona pandemic. Compared to the starting year 2020, fossil energy prices for gas, oil and coal were up to 150% higher in 2023. The workshops assumed, therefore, that prices will settle at a higher level in the long term than in 2020, and they entered the value plus 75%. In order to enter this value, we have to press the button Financial Outcomes. Here we can move the slider until it shows 75% higher fossil fuel prices. We see that the payback time has shortened from 29 years to 17 years. So when assessing a measure like installing a heat pump, you can't just look at the purchase price. You also have to consider the energy costs over the coming decades. The purchase price of a heat pump is actually more than twice as high as that of a new gas burner. The payback period for a new gas burner is about 15 years, based on the fossil prices of 2020. For the heat pump, it is 29 years, based on 2020 prices. However, if one takes into account the expected price development of fossil energies and assumes 75% higher gas prices in the future, the payback period of the heat pump drops from 29 to only 17 years. The payback period of a new gas burner, however, is extended to 28 years if 75% higher gas prices are assumed for the future. You have now certainly understood how the scenario program works. I would now like to look at the transport sector with you as a second example. Scenario workshop, the energy consumption sectors are discussed one after the other. In the case of private households and in the case of services industry, the heating, cooling and the electricity sector are discussed and the corresponding discussion results are entered. The transportation sector is structured somewhat differently.
In the transport sector, the focus is on the extent to which fossil fuels can be replaced by non-fossil fuels and how the efficiency of engines and the use of cars is developing.
You will surely remember that we already put the National Grid renewable slider to 90%, which had very few effect on the transportation sector. And this is due to the fact that in 2020 there were very few electrical cars. If we go to the transport sector and assume that in 2040 70% of the cars will be electrical cars, then the transportation emissions are saved by 68%. There's another parameter. Internal combustion engines have an energy efficiency of 30%, electrical engines of at least 80%. If we enter an efficiency increase of 50% as a cautious assumption, we see that now 84% of emissions have been saved in the transport sector.
In almost all workshops, the end result for the target year 2040 was a CO2 saving of around 85% and a payback period of more or less 10 years, even though the workshop participants made moderate assumptions. Once the national data is entered into the program, it can be used to conduct workshops in an unlimited number of cities in that country. This principle applies worldwide. If you have created a national version in Switzerland, Norway or Spain, you can hold scenario workshops in an unlimited number of cities in the country. You certainly still have questions. We have compiled the most important answers below. Thank you for your interest, and perhaps we see us again in a workshop in your city or your institution.
Do heat pumps in new buildings have a shorter payback period? Clearly yes. The calculated 17 years payback period refers to the average residential building in 2020. New buildings and well-renovated old buildings with new windows, doors and roof insulation are 30 to 50% more energy efficient. If an energy efficiency increase of 30% is entered, the payback time of the heat pump drops from 70 to 12 years. However, such an energy efficiency increase would also reduce the payback time of all other heating systems. Who programmed reMAC? This was Tim Page, at that time IT manager of Metrix, the Association of European Metropolitan Regions. reMAC emerged from Metrix UCO 28050 project, which was carried out in 15 major European cities from 2007 to 2011. There, a scenario program was used that only showed the CO2 impacts of the measures. Therefore, Tim Page designed and programmed reMAC to also show in scenario workshop the payback period of investment. The experience gained from 54 workshops so far was used to improve the program and resulted in an adaptive version that allows for local scenarios. Has reMAC been scientifically evaluated? Yes. Professor Dr. Walter Leal evaluated reMAC. He teaches at the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences and at Manchester Metropolitan University. Professor Leal is one of the lead authors of the second part of the World Climate Report. He recommends the use of reMAC. Climate change is a problem of global dimensions, but with local implications. reMAC is a tool that will be of great benefit to cities and regions worldwide, helping them to find cost-effective and fast-acting solutions on their way to becoming regenerative cities. Why focus on energy consumption? CO2 emissions occur in 4 areas: agriculture, waste recycling, industrial processes, and, above all, energy consumption. At the global level, the consumption of electrical and non-electrical energy accounts for 75% of all CO2 emissions. In European metropolitan regions, energy consumption is responsible for 87% of all emissions. How do the data get into reMAC? The emission factors are deposited according to IPCC standards. The national energy supply data and the distribution of the consumption sectors and other socio-demographic data were fed in on the basis of 2020. The average European installation costs for renewable energies were fed in to calculate the investment costs and the payback period. The local data is fed in at the beginning of the workshop. The cities have all the necessary data such as energy mix, population and number of households, building structure, age structure and ratio of shares of industry and services. Who should attend the scenario workshops? Experience shows that a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 20 participants are useful. In cities, the participants usually come from the departments of urban planning, finance, transport, economic development, environmental protection and public enterprises. However, a mixed group of participants from politics, administration, business, science, trade unions and associations is desirable and often stimulates the discussion. reMAC can also be used in school classes at universities and in vocational training. A scenario workshop with a reMAC program usually lasts about 3 hours. What does it cost to use reMAC? In Germany, the German Institute of Urban Affairs financed the production of a national version. German cities can now benefit from the fact that there is a national version. They only pay a license fee to the author of the program in the low 4-digit range. It varies according to the size of the city and allows unlimited use of the program. In other European countries, someone has to be found to cover the costs of the national version. Then, as in Germany, the cities only have to pay a small license fee. Cities receive a step-by-step introduction and, upon request, a mentor for training. Who are the contact persons? These are Tim Page, the author of the program, and Rainer Scheppelmann. Rainer Scheppelmann was the coordinator of the UGO2 8050 project from 2005 to 2011. He was on the steering committee of the reMAC Climate Protection and Energy Steering Committee from 2005 to 2013, and at the same time head of the reMAC Metropolitan Region Climate Protection Energy Working Group.